Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture Podcast. I'd like to start this one with a thanks. Thank you so much for supporting both the podcast and the magazine. We've been increasing the print run of the magazine and have been super pleased now to sell out the last couple of issues. I guess we're probably doing something right, and we'll continue to do that. Our dream has always been to bring a truly independent magazine that is free from adverts and features good writing and images to match. So that's my promise. And I'd like to thank you for supporting us along this journey. We're coming up, I think it's 3 years old now. So it's been amazing, and it's still fascinating to hear from listeners and readers, more importantly as well, that they're enjoying what we're doing. So we're going to continue to do that. We've got some great plans for next year as well, which I'll be able to reveal a little bit further down the line. But right now, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Steve Cullen. He's a well-travelled angler, has represented England in all disciplines of fly fishing, has been an editor of a fly fishing magazine, brand manager for a tackle company, and a fishing guide too. As you can see, he's got a pretty impressive CV, which gives us plenty to talk about. Steve, it's great to have you here. How's it going?
Fantastic, Pete. And thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem at all. It's fascinating to be able to talk to you, and we've got so much to cover. But how's it going? You getting out fishing?
I've been getting out fishing quite a bit, buddy. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I've been doing a lot in rivers, but recently I've been out in some of the bigger reservoirs, targeting some of the bigger fish. But the weather's not really been conducive to that, unfortunately, for me. So, yeah, when the reservoirs go off, I actually just wrote a piece not that long ago. When the reservoirs go off, go and hit a river, because once those reservoirs go off, they're never picking up. Unless you get the weather, a little bit of cloud cover, a nice breeze. But the overnight temperatures just now, they're not going in at single figures. So the surface water temperature is quite high on the reservoirs. So, yeah, I would say stick to running water. That's what I've been doing.
Yeah. It's been, as I've been saying, I've had a lovely time that when the river comes up, I go and swing some flies, and when it comes down, cast some dries, and that's been great. I'm an utter shambles most of the time, and I've got a mini road trip coming up, which I'm really looking forward to. And I've actually been getting my gear ready for it. Are you one of those who gets excited about a trip and gets everything organised, or is it last minute, throw it in the car and off you go?
Definitely not. I'm with you. I'm like months in advance. Whatever I'm doing, I like to be organised. Really, really organised. Probably a bit OCD-ish. I mean, I see some people's fly tying rooms on Facebook and other social media platforms. I want to pull my hair out. Everything in my tying room's got a place. Everything's immaculate. I've got a lovely white background. I've got a lovely white desk. Everything's clean and tidy. My fishing gear's the same. Everything's set up in specific rows of flies and sizes and bead size. Tippets as well. Everything's organised to the 10th degree, Pete. I prefer it that way.
Oh, I'd love to say I'm exactly the same, but I'm not. I'm shambolic. Yeah. This is actually, you obviously can't see it right now, but where my tying desk usually is like the Sahara Desert, and it sort of shifts and moves.
Yes.
And there's CDC everywhere. We had a disaster at home 8-9 years ago where a barn roof came through the roof right by where my fly tying desk is, and you wouldn't have known it, actually. It didn't look a lot different.
And he's still filling bits of roof, still there.
Yeah.
Genius.
So there's all that sort of stuff there. So, yes, I get excited. I'm old enough to know better, but I know I won't sleep very well the night before because I'm really excited. And, yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, how this thing bites us so hard and so deeply that I guess we could almost call ourselves old campaigners now that we've been around a little while, but it still has that impact on us as fly anglers, doesn't it?
It definitely does. Like the weekend, I was fishing. I was practicing on Saturday, and I was fishing on Sunday, which meant no sleep Friday night, excitement, and no sleep Saturday night, excitement. Sunday evening, I was utterly broken, totally and utterly broken. But even just a trip out with my friend, a nice pleasure day somewhere, which is kind of what I prefer to do nowadays. I like to share a rod, especially on a river. I like to share a rod, have the crack with each other, but definitely the night before, there's not an awful lot of sleep. And that includes after drinking beer. Still can't
Yeah,
fish.
that is the funny thing, isn't it? The sharing of the rod
Yes,
thing.
love it.
Yeah, I was out with my buddy Perry yesterday, and we had the spey rods out in the morning, but we had to go. The sun came out, and we said, "Come on, let's go." We just had one rod. We had the dog with us, and just fanned around really, and it was great fun.
It is good, especially I've got you might or might not know this. I've got a river up in Derbyshire, the River Derwent, and I took a friend up there. He's an ex-course fisher, very, very good course fisher, fished at a very high level, but he was getting a bit upset at the fact that he couldn't catch the fish that he used to catch in some of the English rivers. I'm talking roach and chub and dace, etc. So he turned his hand to fly fishing, but he turned his hand to the stillwater side of fly fishing. I explained to him that if we get the time, I'll take him up to the river and he can catch a fish on a dry fly. Well, we went up and we spent a day on the river. It was 29 degrees. It was May, just after lockdown. It was baking. I was lucky enough to get him up on the river. See, try to find a rising fish. Honestly, it was like pulling teeth. But we found him, and he caught his first proper wild brownie on the fly, and he got a wild rainbow, which is something which is pretty rare to the UK. So these things breed up in the Wye, but they drop down into the Derwent. I fished the Derwent below the Wye. So just to see his face, just to see the pleasure of his face, even just with the brownie, because he caught a brownie first, and it was like your Devon fish. It wasn't nothing to write home about, 6 to 7 inches, but it was just over the moon. That on a 9'3" weight and a really skinny tippet and a little small fly. Just seeing his face, he was absolutely over the moon. And that's the kind of thing that I get a lot of enjoyment out now. I see it a lot with my son. I take my son fishing, course fishing originally, but recently I've been taking him fly fishing on the lakes and the rivers. And he just becomes so absorbed in it all. A bit like what I was like when I was younger. It consumes all of my time. I want to do it all the time. Unfortunately, you can't fish all the time. I'm not lucky enough to do that.
It's funny, isn't it? Like you say about you're thinking about it, and when it rains, it wakes me up in bed, and I'm thinking, right, is that going to be enough to raise? And that's part of when I was guiding, because I'm thinking, oh God, what am I going to do if it's a lot of rain and stuff like that? But everything seems to revolve around it. And I don't think personally that's a bad thing. I love it. And the people you revolve around as a result feel the way that you do as well, don't they? And you can say, oh, well, where we fish it? And they've been out either yesterday or the day before or whatever it is. And you're talking about stuff. Did you see this? Did you see that? And that's what I love about it, and love being around people who feel that way, the same way as we do about it.
Do you know anyone that gets to the stage? Because I do get like this. So if I'm on a river and I see a big fish rising, I get squeaky voice. I get so hyped up. It's like I can only really compare it to the Bassmasters guys in America. It's like, yeah, look at that. I get so het up. And trying to convey that to somebody that doesn't have it, it makes me feel like a child. I feel childlike because they're like looking at me as if to say, are you for real? I was like, yeah, this is how excited I get. And unless you've got that passion for whatever it is in life, whether it be fly fishing, golf, or football, darts, whatever, unless you've got that passion, it's very hard to relay the feelings that you have to other people. For me personally, it's a proper drug that I need to have. I've got an amazing family. I've got amazing kids, an amazing wife. She lets me do whatever I want. I can go wherever I want in the world. She doesn't bat an eyelid. She's so great. However, saying that, I still need to have fishing. It's not enough for me to have a great family and a great life. I need to fish. I must fish. You'll know this because you know a lot of the guys that I know. I've got a couple of friends that are salmon anglers. And I say they're salmon anglers. There's hardly any fish these days, or there seems to be hardly any fish these days, unless you live in a river. Now, these guys have been out continuously this year, continuously. They haven't seen a fish. Never mind hooked a fish. They haven't seen a fish. And yet they still get excited because they know they're going fishing in the morning. How do you convey that to somebody that doesn't have the same feelings? You can't. And I think fishing, you see when you hook a fish, and somebody gave me this analogy a long time ago, it's like being a kid on Christmas morning. So you come down the stairs and you see all these presents, and you're like, this is just awesome. There's presents here, but you don't know what the presents are. I think when you hook a fish, it's exactly the same. You don't know what it is until you've hooked that fish and brought it in. And I think I've been fishing before in the past where I've been fishing for trout and hooked big salmon. Like September, not actually bugging for grayling, but actually fishing for trout and hooked big salmon. I've had salmon on dry flies as well. That whole thing with fishing, size, species, whatever, you just never know what you're going to hook. And I think that's what's special. I think that's what keeps us going back time and time again.
Yeah, it's interesting. The river here is, it's going to be a hot day, but I'll be down there tomorrow.
Can't help it.
No, I can't. And it's getting worse, I think, which is even worse. And I've said previously, where I've been standing next to people for a number of years, now I'm being a little bit more, not selfish, but I want to fish on my own for a bit and just fish. And it's making me love it even more than I've ever loved it. And that's been really interesting to see. You could have the situation where you could do it every day.
That's it.
And fall out. But I don't think I could or would. And I try my best to fish whenever I can. We've been hitting it hard, and like you say for the salmon, and I've managed one, but I've just been getting such a kick. But my wife was down with me day after yesterday, and she was casting. She said, "I'm knackered," and I said, "Why is that?" It was so much adrenaline. I felt like it was going to happen. I was like on the edge the whole time, and that's really interesting to see as well. But coming back to the high pitch thing, I know exactly what you mean, and I've got some spots where I'm fishing where we've been catching some amazing fish for the West Country, and you just get so excited when you see them rising, and your friend's next to you and he's got a shot at one of these. And my friend Warren, he'll be listening to this, and he came down and with Jim and we found one, and he hooked this fish, and it was just awesome. It just came off at the net, but we saw it leap, we saw it was a big fish, and it was just awesome to be able to do that. And I think I probably was commentating or doing whatever I was doing because I was so excited about it. And I don't think I'll ever lose those feelings about it. I think that's where fishing's so good, that it's so consuming in different ways, isn't it?
I totally agree. As you say, there's 3 U's there, so it's a group, it's a gang of guys. Didn't get me wrong, women in fishing, not a problem, but there's something about a group of anglers together fishing. It brings out the kid, it brings out the child in all of us. I went to Iceland a few years ago, and you're on about hitting things hard, and I hope that you personally hope that you never lose that feeling. I was in Iceland for 5 days, and on those 5 days, I think there's like 30 minutes of semi-darkness, literally semi-darkness. And I was fishing all the time. And I was there with a guy called Lynn Davies, who's a cameraman. I think he works in print now. Lovely guy. And by day 2, he was wanting to sleep all the time. By day 4, I'd broken my wading boots. I'd taken the sole off my wading boots, and I'd bound them up with socks so that I could still go fishing. And Lynn's like, you're off your head. And I was like, well, I might never get that. I might not ever get this opportunity again. And I think that's the thing. When you're that absorbed by it, any means necessary, to get out fishing.
Yeah, and long may that continue as well. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I said we'd go off in all different directions as we had, but let's go back to your timeline a little bit, and let's learn a little bit about your fishing journey. And where did you grow up, and how did you start fishing?
I grew up in the Scottish borders in a town called Hawick. Where I lived, you could literally throw a stone from my window, this is no word in exaggeration, and hit the Teviot. So my house is on this side of the river, and on the other side there was the Pringles Mill, Pringles Knitwear. It was the biggest employer in the whole of the borders. And I used to go to sleep at night, and I could hear the machines buzzing. It used to send me to sleep. Brilliant. But in the summer, I used to spin for trout, and I used to do a thing called bubble float and fly, which is basically a spinning rod and a bubble floating end with some wet flies that we used to buy from the pet shop at 12 pence each. Teal blue and silver, mallard and claret, silver butcher, etc. And then in the winter, the salmon came in. So we had trout and grayling in the summer. Like grayling were considered a pest fish. These were bad for the river. They were bad for salmon. And that's kind of how I got into fly fishing, because there was this boy that came up from England, And where my house was, it's a bit called the Pen End. And there's like a tunnel that comes out when you get a big flood. It's like an overflow system for all the drains. And there's like a big gouge. It's a big deep hole. But just above that, it's a big run and it's shallow water, maybe 2 feet deep. And I watched this English boy from the Pen End catch grayling after, I can't emphasize how many fish this man caught with a fly rod. And I spoke to him. I was just a little boy. I must have been 10 or 11. 10 or 11, 9, 10 or 11. I was young. It was before high school. And I asked him and he explained it all. Now, previous to that, I'd seen guys fish with salmon rods, but you never seen anybody fly fishing. You've seen them fishing with salmon rods, fly fishing. But this fishing for small fish, grayling and trout, I'd never seen before. So he explained it to me. And it was ever since then that I became hooked. I had a line. My stepdad had a salmon rod, a really dodgy salmon rod and salmon line set up. And I'd thread that line through 2 parts of a spinning fiberglass rod to create my own little fly rod. And it was hideous, horrible, ridiculous, didn't work. But I caught par on it. I could catch par closing at the sides. And eventually I caught a grayling. And from there, I ended up getting this this really badly made fly rod as a gift secondhand from somebody's granddad. So that was kind of my first proper fly rod. And it just sort of went from there, really.
And did you have mentors along the way, or was it with friends? Was it with family?
Nope.
You just went out and did it?
No, never had a mentor, not at all. What happened was, like I say, in the borders, it was spinning or worming, or we used to use a thing called drop baggy, which is a minnow mounted on a lead. It sounds horrific, and trust me, it is. But you used to use that, similar to fishing streamers just now for trout, but it was very effective. And I used to, I had a dad, but he left when I was very young. So I had a stepdad, but it was my Uncle Graham that used to take me up to the hill locks, and it was wild brown trout. And we used to stop off at a dung heap to collect brambling worms. So it was my Uncle Graham that got me into fishing. But the whole fly fishing thing, completely off my own back, as was fly tying, completely and utterly self-taught. The whole casting, tying flies, etc. One person took me out in the river. I'd done river fishing, but I was clueless really to river fishing apart from swinging wet flies. But a guy called Grant Gibson, when I moved to Garla Shields, I was fishing still waters at the time. I was fishing a lot up at Loch Leven. But this young guy called Grant Gibson was supposed to be really good in the Tweed, so I asked him to take me out bugging. He showed me how to bug in, it was probably 2000. And it was from 2000 that I got the real river fishing thing. I just wanted to get better and better and better and better. So I learnt all these different techniques. So yeah, that's kind of, so it started on the river and it's kind of ended on the river. Well, still water fishing in between and a bit everything else, if that makes sense.
It's interesting what you say about being self-taught. And did that mean that process, because it was, in those days, it was tougher to learn to cast, wasn't it? There weren't many instructors at the time. There weren't many books.
Yeah.
So did that mean the process, because now you can go onto YouTube and pretty much learn any cast you want. Do you think that process took a little bit longer as a result, but you learned more because of that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things I will say is when I first started with the fly rod, I neglected to mention this, but I used to fish it a lot in a flood, in a little back eddy, and I used to fish worms straight off a bit of nylon on the fly line in a back eddy, and it was great for seeing takes because the fly fished naturally. The fly line would let it fish in the back eddy. And then I sort of got into using bits of split shot to load the rod because I couldn't load it properly. The whole line rating was made for a salmon rod on a spinning rod that was meant for trout. Do you know what I mean? So it was completely and utterly cack-handed, but I think it stood me in good stead for fly rods moving forwards because pretty much any rod now, from a really lightweight middle to tip to a super fast action 9, 10, 11, 12 weight for salt water, I can handle, I can pick it up, and I'm casting straight away. The other thing I would say is when you're self-taught, and forgive me for all the casting instructors listening to this and yourself, but I think a lot of things when you're self-taught becomes mechanical, especially fishing a river, likes of the Tweed, likes the Derwent. You learn to manipulate your cast to suit the situation, whereas when you're taught, I think you adhere a lot more closely to what you were taught rather than going off on a tangent. I fish a lot just now in little brooks and streams where you can't get a dry fly in, but you can fish streamers. And some of the things that you do to load the rod to ping a streamer upstream or downstream, conventional casting instruction doesn't teach you that. It doesn't teach you that. Your conventional casting, and I can remember, forgive me, I can remember Booth Wells Hotel, Tim Smith and I got drunk the night before, and you guys were holding a casting clinic, and you were with me with, it was you and, who was it now? Ichthid Griffiths. And you were saying, yep, you can cast great, Steve. Now tell me what you're doing. And I was like, sorry? You're like, your casting's fine, but can you explain to me what you're doing? I had no clue. No clue. As a teacher, I could not tell you what I was doing to get that fly line to go that far or that way or how it loaded. And I think that's the difference when you're self-taught. I think casting instructors, they're exceptional and they're very good at what they do. But I think sometimes going off on a tangent and doing stuff your own way, you learn how to manipulate things in your favour.
Yeah, that's an interest. And coming back to your stream as well, you were learning watercraft there as well, just by spending time on the water. And it is, like you, I guess where I was saying, it's easy to learn to cast via YouTube or wherever it may be. That would be in a similar way then as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because it would be a structured sort of way. And I've used it, apologies, before, but, you know, the cricketer Steve Smith, and he is unorthodox, but it works fantastically well. And I'm sort of trying to appreciate that in fly casting as well as fishing. And if you can get your fly from A to B without spooking the fish, it doesn't really matter too much, does it?
I think you just hit the nail on the head there. If you can present a fly in such a way that the fish is fooled by it, you've won. You've won every single time. Everyone's a coconut. And I think the problem that people don't get, I see it a lot. I actually said to somebody the other day, I seen a post on Facebook, as we see all the time. It's constant social media. However, I feel we're in a situation now where a lot of anglers think they know X, Y, or Z. However, I gave an angler, and he's a well-known angler, a book the other day. It was Stan Headley's Lockfisher's Bible. Now, whatever you think of Stan, that book is the Bible when it comes to lock-style fishing and targeting wild fish. And this guy hadn't read it. And I was trying to explain some of the things that are covered in that. And he was like, well, why do I need that? And at that point, I was like, do you really need this book? If you're interested in learning that, what's the point? People see a finite spot in their fishing. They don't need to go past that. Some of the reservoir anglers that we see today, they pack their reservoir gear up in September. The best of the fishing is October and November. They've stopped because it's not their kind of fishing. And I think that's where we've got just now is you're an angler, I'm an angler. I know many good anglers. However, I also see a lot of boys that think they're good fishermen because they can pull a blob and catch a few fish here and there during the peak of the season when there's lots of fish to be caught. These same people, when you take them out in November and you're looking for a big fish, and you might catch 2 if you're lucky. That's a terrible day to them. That's a great day for me. I love it. It's an absolutely fantastic day for me.
Do you think that is being more mature, been around it a lot longer, that the motivations are different? And I know, again, it's that typical thing that we always talk about as your progression as an angler. But the more I'm talking to people, the more I think it's true that you might be going for the hard fish, or like you say, not the numbers, but that special fish. And it becomes more about that, doesn't it? And that isn't the success, isn't having that term bagging up or whatever.
You got it.
Yeah, it's not just that, is it?
Not at all. I think the bagging up mentality exists. It's always going to exist. However, for an angler, for a fisherman, for a true fisherman or fisher person, I should say, fisher person, let me get that right. The real benefit and the real bonus is looking for me, it's a fish underneath a tree branch, rising only occasionally, and its head's an inch from the surface. That fly has to be pinpoint with no drag if I'm going to catch him. You never got to catch him otherwise. And I think we've all been, and I was certainly there for a long, long time. I wanted to catch more than everybody else, always. I still do. There is occasions where I still do, and it's needed. However, as an angler now, I find myself drifting off to places in Wales to look for bigger fish, places further up in England to look for wilder locations, not necessarily bigger fish, but better locations to fish. But I find myself more and more picking a small piece of water and trying to work out how I can catch for that piece of water. A few years ago on a particular stretch of the Derwent, fished a duo it was basically like a canal. There was no flow. It was terrible. And I fished several methods to see what I could catch out of that bit of water. Most people, and I highlighted this recently in something that I wrote, most people completely and utterly bypass the hard water. In the UK, we've got this fixation with easy. I'll take the easy option. I want to catch numbers from here. I want to fish that water before he does because he's going to catch them or they're going to catch them. Whereas a lot of foreign anglers, anglers that fish all over the world, especially like America, New Zealand, Slovenia, some parts of Italy, they prefer the trickier water. They prefer the challenge of challenging fish. Not all of us, don't get me wrong, because there's a lot of exceptional talent out there when it comes to fly fishing. But a lot of these exceptionally talented anglers go out of their way to look for tricky water and tricky fish to make their day worthwhile. But it's a minority, Pete. That's the sad bit. It's a minority.
And somebody who listens to this contacted me a little while back and said, well, it's interesting because they contacted me and said, well, you're lucky you fish a lot and I don't get to fish a great deal. So I want to try and catch those fish on that day that I get my, twice a year fish or whatever. So I'm with you absolutely on that, but I kind of get that argument, and it really made me think about it. I mentioned it on here before that people were actually, don't get as much time on the water, so they want to do it. But I think for us who are lucky enough to fish a little bit more, that challenge, something a little bit trickier, is of great interest and great reward if you make it work as well, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. And forgive me for saying what I say. I kind of get what you're saying. If I'm a person with limited time, of course I want to catch fish. All of us want to catch fish. However, I maybe fish 2 to 3 times in a month, different locations. When I fish, wherever I fish, I tend to look for the challenging option. Now, I don't think 2 or 3 times a month's that often. Do you know what I mean? When I was in Scotland, I was like 5 nights a week. If there was a fall of spinners, I'd be in the river in the summer 5 nights a week. If it was April, I'd be on the river as much as I could from 10:30 to 2:30. I'd correlate my trips to the river to catch numbers, but I would still be there every single day. Every single day. Whereas now, like I say, I'd prefer to travel. I like to fish different rivers, and I think people get a bit stuck in their ways. They go to the same bit and fish the same areas time and time again. I think to become a good angler, you need to challenge yourself by fishing different locations.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think it's, probably experience as well, isn't it? That, you're a great angler and you want that challenge of earning that difficult fish.
Yeah.
And I guess it comes back to you're past that stage of the number thing. You've done it, haven't you? And fished intensely, for quite some time. And then, fitting family time and everything else around it, that you can go out to the river, find that tricky one. And I'm with you on that being able to test yourself and fish different water and say, right, okay, this should be how it works, and it's a pleasant surprise when it does. And then you look for that next challenge, don't you? That's how I tend to be
Total
with it. I've
bonus.
got lucky and caught a fish, then
Yeah.
I want the hard one, or I
Yeah.
want to wait and that again, it comes back to why we love it so much, I guess, doesn't it?
But then you're a salmon angler. I kind of think of anything more difficult to do in this country than to go and catch a salmon. I mean,
That is, I guess, yeah, it's the ultimate of that, isn't it? The trickiest
Yep.
moment that happens, and you do it just for that moment. And because it's so dumb, and my buddy yesterday, I said, I still say it's a fish that's not eating,
Yeah.
and we're still going for it no matter what.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is. You just get to a different level, I guess, and how you feel about it and how you motivate you. But I agree with what you've been saying, I must say. But let's so when was it that you realized that fly fishing, you'd been doing these other sorts of bits and pieces, when was it that you discovered or felt that, yeah, fly fishing, this is it now, this is where I'm probably going to spend a lot more of my time?
I must have been 18 or 19. I mean, I'd fished, don't get me wrong, I'd fished all the way through that period, different kinds of fishing, with a fly rod and with spinning rods and bait rods, etc. But it was a day on the Tweed. My brother-in-law and I, and a couple of his friends, because I'd no long moved to, he wasn't my brother-in-law at the time, but he was my sister's boyfriend at the time. And we went into the River Tweed, and they all had spinning rods and stuff, and I had a fly rod. I was the only one with a fly rod. And I told them I knew what I was doing. I didn't really. I'd fished a few still waters. I didn't really know what I was doing. But I had a rough idea. And I got a grayling about 2.5 pounds. And he was insistent I kill it. He was completely honest. Let me kill it. Let me take it to my dad. Let me say that I caught it. So I was like, well, that's a bit unfair. But anyway, we killed it. And he took it to his dad and he got all the kudos. But I think the fact that I caught that fish when they didn't, using a fly rod, and they had all the gear, and that was it for me. And I think there's something, unlike any other kind of fishing, and I've fished for everything and all kinds of methods, unlike any other kind of fishing, the connection between a fly rod, a fly, and a fish is completely different. It's just it's so utterly different to anything else that you're likely to do. Anything, completely different.
Yeah. So that was the tipping point for you. And then when did your career in fly fishing actually start? I sort of, I've known you, as you know, a long time. And but when did that actually start for you, the career where you were working in fly fishing?
2005. I was so in 2005, April 2005, I was training people as a super user on a program called Oracle for Scottish Water. And a guy called Tim Smith contacted me. Still to this day, I have no idea how he got my number. But it was those old Nokia phones. And I got a text, would you like to take Dave Downey, who was a well-known competition stillwater angler at the time, on the River Tweed so we can do a feature? Yep, not a problem. So I met Tim. Dave Downey fished. Me and Tim got on like brothers. Honestly, the relationship from pretty much the word go was we really bonded very, very quickly. I mean, like, we had so much in common: fishing, music, lifestyle, everything. We were like peas in a pod. Anyway, that day was done and dusted. And about a week later, I got a text saying, do you fancy a job? And I was like, no, I'm okay, thanks. And then a month later, he came back to me, look, there's a job here if you want it. You'll be fishing all the time. And again, I refused. And he approached me a third time. So it's probably 2.5 months after that. 2.5 months? June? Yeah, it must have been June or July. And he says, look, whatever you're getting just now at Scottish Water, we'll match it salary-wise. So I told him what I was getting. He came back and said, sorry, we can't match that. He says, however, we can give you X amount of money, but bear in mind, you'll get to fish everywhere. And so I was like, right, okay. And I'd not long split up with a girl that I'd been with for 17 years. And I was in a new relationship and it was going great. My job was going great. And I was like, if I don't do this, I'll regret it. So I did it. I gave up the girlfriend, I gave up my job, handed my resignation, put a deposit down in a flat down here, and put all my stuff into a van and drove down in August, and I started in September, and that was it. That was basically it, and it was just such an amazing time. Tim and I, like I say to you before we sort of recorded, we were like brothers. We were so bonded to each other. It was incredible. All we wanted to do was socialise and fish. He was at my house. I was at his house. We'd eat tea together. We'd get geared up for the next again day and go fishing. Yeah, we had a ball. Yeah, we totally had a ball.
And for those listening that didn't know the magazine, I'm sure you probably do, it was Total Fisher or Total
Today's Fly Fisher.
Oh, it was today's
yeah,
then.
That's what it was called then.
Total.
And then it became Total, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and at the time, we were, like you say, we were talking off mic, and it was pushing barriers in different ways that I'd not seen, and I bought it from a fishing point of view, that it covered a number of bases, but it had really interesting information in it that you sort of everyone was learning. And I know off mic again, we talked about, I remember, I think I was aware of check nymphing, but I remember reading a piece in there from Simon Robinson about check nymphing, and it was all a bit sort of finger in the air. How does this kind of work? But you were pushing it and saying, look, this is how people are fishing. Yet on the next page, you might be talking about sea trout fishing and how to sea trout fish, or giving casting advice or whatever it was. And at the time, it was a real sort of different, it was a breath of fresh air, I think, from a magazine point of view, that you were doing some innovative and different stuff, I felt, and I'm sure many others did too.
I think we got away with it for so long, Pete. This is what we got away with. So the whole ethos behind the magazine, when Tim and I were doing it, is we wanted to do stuff different to what was out there, and see just how far we could push it. You mentioned the bugging for grayling with Simon Robinson. We did stuff on streamers when nobody had actually heard about it before. I did a feature with Howard Croston on flies that look like bait, double maggots, etc. We caught sea trout on foam moth patterns. We did everything, and we did everything that was not being done, things that were not being done by the normal angling media. We were trying to cover. We had that whole fixation of how to. There was a lot of technical stuff in there, but it wasn't. This is fry time. It's October. Fish a minkie. It was something like fish a popper fry with a nymph underneath it, New Zealand style, and fish over the weed beds. How to target structure effectively rather than just fishing out in the open or in the weed beds. Things that had never been covered before, because of the amount of people that I knew and the amount of people that Tim knew and the amount of people that knew us. We had such a wealth of knowledge from all these amazing anglers that could share with us techniques and styles of fishing that nobody's seen before. We did. Tim and I were looking for a feature one day. We were at Tesco's shopping, and the River Avon runs past it, and this place is a dive, Pete. I can't tell you. There's shopping trolleys in there, beer cans, horrific. But there was fish in there. There was coarse fish, and he was like, "Grab your river rod." So I grabbed a river rod. We tied up some white rabbits, and we went up the river catching perch and pike. It had never been done before. Not in the press. I'm not saying that people weren't doing it, because people were, but nobody was covering stuff like that. And we wanted to cover it. And I think the other thing that we did quite successfully, with the helps of people like John Bailey, and sort of other, I would call these guys media types, because they were media types that people knew. We were bringing in content from abroad, and a lot of other magazines weren't doing that. So we were trying to get a mix of brand new, never been seen before. Let's try and do something a bit different and scary. Let's do something really basic for people to learn, like the casting school. We joined up with App Guy, and we did this massive course on casting every month, which helped. We had really good, competent fly tying step by steps. Again, not really done before. but with patterns that were really successful, not things cobbled together to promote somebody's feathers or somebody's hooks. These were flies that caught fish, if that makes sense. So that was the ethos for 2 years, and then the boss, it changed. The boss of the business wanted it to be more blokey and jokey and a little bit Mickey taking, like some of his course fishing magazines. And that's kind of when I felt, and Tim as well, it really wasn't what we signed up for. But at the end of the day, they paid the salary. So, but yeah, for 2 years we did really well with some different stuff.
Well, I remember one of the other things I liked was where you had the mystery ex fly fisher who went. Yeah, it was
Agent
so he
X.
would go to a fishery and review it, because it must be, if somebody like yourself or Tim or whoever turns up at a fishery, or you say you're going
That's
there.
Right.
Balance can be, whereas if you're doing incognito, then you're getting a real true, and things like that were really kind of interesting and different. Like you say, was different.
It's funny. The Agent X thing was great. We also did this thing, we did this stopwatch challenge where anglers would fish a gate, and that was great as well, because it was like captioned and segmented like a comic, but you could see what was happening every 15, 20 minutes. Other things that we did that other people never did, we did blind rod testing. We had you've got to remember, in those days, Pete, advertising was everything. You mucked up with an advertiser, you lost their advertising space. And we had all these high-end rods, everything Cortland, Orvis, Sage, G. Loomis, and we were doing this test on river rods, and a lure flash Viper. Tim and I wore blindfolds, and Sue Shaw at the time, who was our salesperson, she was writing down all our results, and both Tim and I picked a lure flash Viper as the best river rod. And it was. To Tim and I, it was the best rod. But yeah, things like that, we were very, probably a bit too honest at times, because we were young. None of us were journalists. We were fishermen. We were always fishers first, and we got trained as journalists by this guy in London, and we also got a lot of ongoing training while we were there. But our whole ethos was, and the boss's ethos was, you're fishermen first, journalists second. So yeah, we really sort of cut it a bit fine at times.
I remember now you say that stopwatch challenge, and the idea of that, if listeners didn't know, was that there would be a certain time, it might be 2 hours or whatever, and the person entering it had to tie a fly and then catch a fish, or a certain amount of fish, or a species of fish. And it was really, really interesting. And it's a shame, because the format must have been working to that degree, but I suppose a lot of it is down, if it's part of a publishing house and stuff.
That's
like
it.
You say, you have to toe the line and fit in with the other titles, I guess, don't you?
That's it. And we did other things where we brought, you touched on it initially when we talked about bugging with Simon Robinson. We also did things like streamer fishing with Howard Croston. We had really gifted anglers at the time, but we did things like we brought in a little feature called Desert Island Flies, and it was basically 3 flies from this person, that person, but these are people that are held in very high esteem within the fly fishing industry and the fly fishing world in general. These are patterns that people never got to see, but I think because of Tim and I's way with people are very forthcoming and helping. I can remember one of my interviews. So when I first got there, one of the things that I had to do as part of my interview when I met David Hall is I had to phone Simon Kidd up. I'd never met the guy before in my life, and I had to interview him. Now, can you imagine that as a normal man that's just been, I was training people up at Scottish Water, just a desk job basically, having to interview somebody off the cuff for the first time in your life. And that's kind of how Tim and I did it for the first. We winged it. We winged an awful lot of that magazine, but it worked. It worked because people wanted to help us. People genuinely liked us and wanted to help us.
Yeah, that's really cool. That is cool to hear. So Tim headed back down to Cornwall to look after the family farm, didn't? I know he went to. Yes, he did, didn't he? Or did he go diving? Yeah, he did.
No, he went to the Arundel Arms first of all,
and then
he's still there actually. But yeah, He's got a dairy farm. His farmer's got a dairy farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you took over as editor.
Yeah.
And then that sort of, like you say, the thing having to, it's probably the wrong phrase, but toe the line a little bit more.
Definitely toe the line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
didn't work so well.
Yeah.
So then you moved on, and the next
Yeah.
step for you was brand manager, and you went into the tackle side of things.
That's right. I joined Witchwood in January 2015. The company had approached me. One of the brand directors within Madison, who's the umbrella company that owns Madison, basically, had approached me. So I went in and we talked. And I think the plan was then is they were going to just leave Witchwood as it was. There was a carp guy that was in charge of it, but nothing was happening. And I basically says, look, this is a fantastic brand. It's a heritage brand in the UK, basically born and bred in the UK. It's a massive boon to have it. And the guy that was there before me is a good friend of mine, 9 years, Paul Richardson, had done a great job, like a really amazing job. He brought that company from a company that did a bit of clothing and some drugs to what it was. He really revolutionized that brand in general. He did such a good job. So I kind of explained that to these guys, and it wasn't until I'd explained it that they thought, well, you know what? Maybe we've got something decent here. Maybe we've got something that we can grow on. So yeah, that's how I ended up working there. I basically says, look, you've got a heritage brand. It's fantastic. People know about it. We've got a great foundation on which to build on, which Paul had done. Let's go ahead and see if we can do it. And there was all these great plans and ideas at first, which is always the case with big companies. But yeah, for the 4 years that I was there, 5 years that I was there, it was good. It was healthy. There was lots of new product that came through. But as with all businesses, you get to a stage where, is the investment worth the return? Is the money better spent elsewhere, whether it be carp fishing, coarse fishing, or the leader brand itself? So they look at that in more detail, and yeah, that's kind of where it ended for me, really. And you have to sort of fight your corner.
Yeah, I was going to say that must be a difficult one, because if you're up against the carp market,
yes,
internally, that's going to be a bigger populated space, I guess, and so that's where their eyes are going to be diverted to a lot of the time, I guess.
That's exactly what happened, Pete. In a nutshell, that's exactly what happened. You had a very big coarse fishing brand, and you had a sizable carp brand, and they wanted to grow it. The problem is the carp market's saturated now. I think the real focus for Madison should have been Witchwood and Leader. And in no uncertain terms, you know what I'm like. I spoke my mind in several meetings, and I thought Witchwood game could grow more than any other part of the business. However, that meant branching out into Europe, and unfortunately that facility wasn't there, or the funds to pursue that wasn't really there. But while I was there, it was good. We did some great product, something different, unique, design-wise. It's always been a good brand. You know, I hope that it stays that way. All the product that I created came out this year. However, I don't know what's coming out over it, because nobody else has been employed. There is nobody else at Witchwood just now.
Because it was noticeable, wasn't it? And, you know, you mentioned Paul Richardson, who's been a guest on the podcast as well, and he talks about the process of designing reels. And people don't always realise how much goes into that product as well. And, of course, you were developing a lot of rods, and, you know, that trend towards longer, lighter rods. You jumped onto that pretty quickly, and we saw that those rods were coming out from you guys over there as well. So you'd seen those sorts of things, and yeah, it must be interesting to see those developments and again putting your stamp on something.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real pat on the back to yourself when you see your products coming through. I've spoke to Paul about this on numerous occasions. It's just, but listen, it's not just you, it's a whole group of people that make it happen. But the whole concept of the whole point of being a brand manager is coming up with the concept in the first place. You know that market, so you think you know what's going to sell. And the one thing that I did when I first got there is I've always thought Witchwood could be better than it was. Witchwood was always a great brand with great products, but the price point was quite low. So it was just a case of playing with some of the carbon mixes on the rods, playing about with some high-end cosmetics rather than some basic stuff. And we went to the 200 and over barrier with Witchwood rods, and everybody says to me, you'll never do it, you'll never do it. And I did it, and it worked really, really well. The other thing that I did, and it took like five attempts on 2 different visits abroad to get this nailed down, is we did these waders, and there's a source wader, but there's a gorge wader, which is the high-end one. Now, we sell that for £250. There was nothing at the time that was as good as that wader, and we sold out. We did a 2-year order, and we sold out in 8 months. Everybody wanted them. They were bomb-proof. So things like that. And the clothing, I was really, really proud of the clothing. It was all high-end sort of Everest coatings and 3M Thinsulate stuff. And we were able to do that because we could piggyback some of Madison's buying power. At the same time, I couldn't sell it as the same price as Sims, which is a shame because the product was very, very similar. Very, very similar. But that's the whole point of growing a brand. The plan was to take Witchwood from not lower range, but mid-range, and make it mid to high without trying to compete with Hardy's and Sage and Cortland and Orvis. We wanted to try and be a little bit better than Grays. We always wanted to be better than Grays. We wanted to sell a product that was a little bit better than Grays because that was the market. That was the market that I personally looked for. And I had to do all these sort of, I had to focus on specific key points on why a rod would sell or why a reel would sell or why a line would sell. But yeah, it worked. Fly lines as well. We did fly lines, and the concept was to come up with our own packaging specific to that line. So a floating line would have a description of what it was used for and how you could fish it. So as a retailer, you didn't have to explain to a customer exactly what it did and how to use it. Everything was there in a box, you know? All these little things, the packaging, the look, the price point, I feel elevated it a little. The brand was great, don't get me wrong. The brand was fantastic, and Paul did an amazing job. His products were really, really good. Some of them groundbreaking. But it was more just to try and build on what Paul had done already and raise it a little bit. Not with product a little bit, but more, I don't know, make it a more aspirational brand to be associated with. And I hope we did that.
Do you think, having edited a magazine, that you had your finger closely on the pulse of fishing, so it enabled you to spot the things that you felt the market needed, or where the market could be tested a little bit more with those things?
Yeah, definitely. The thing is, because the fishing that I do and the level that I fish other people are at, and the people that I know, I get to see a lot of things that other people don't get to see. We did the whole River Ranger rods and the Buggin Ranger rods and extendable drift rods. They've got a locking mechanism in the handle where you can put an extra 8 inches on them. Nobody'd ever done it before. It'd never been done before. And I still feel to this day that the concept wasn't properly embraced by the UK fishing public, because we're starting to see it now, and we're starting to see it in America now, but we're starting to see it in the UK the last couple of years. 10 years ago, people in the continent were using 10-foot 3-weight rods all the time, or lighter. It took us such a long time to embrace that, and I still feel nowadays, I'm taking a guy out in the river tomorrow. I could more or less guarantee he's got to turn up with a 9-foot 5 weight. That's your standard river setup, or a 4-weight, depending on the river that you fish. But nowadays, I think to fish a river, when I say a river, I didn't mean a stream, I mean a big river. I think you're looking at 3 rods. To fish it effectively, you're looking at 3 rods. 2 rods minimum. You know? And I think our still water scene is, I want a cassette reel. I want a stupid amount of lines that go from the bottom to the very, very top and above it. Let me get something that floats above the water now, please. And rods, sets of 3 rods. River fishermen are still, the majority are still a bag and a rod and a reel. Yeah. Whereas you look at the guys that are good at it, they've got a rod pinned to them, probably a rod in the bank and a chest pack or other gear handy. Everything's there, because I feel that river fishing, more so now, although it's sociable, it's a mission. It's a proper, to fish a river properly is a mission. It's a proper day out on the water, you know?
Yeah. Do you think that influence, it comes from other marketplaces like Scandinavia, like the US, like Canada, and those influences are coming to us that way?
I think no, I think the opposite. What I think is the majority of soft river fishing rods for river fishing applications have came from Italy, Spain, France. And they've migrated to us here, but also over in America. I think what we are seeing here is, or we did see it maybe 5 years ago, and there's a couple of companies like Guide Fly Fishing that are trying to progress it through their sage rods, etc., is switch stuff. There was we go back to the magazine, 15 years ago, I was fishing with Beulah switch rods. Beulah was Guides created them over in America. Yeah, I've got one. Yeah. And I've got an 11-foot 6-weight 6-weight switch Beulah rod. I think we're taking some of the switch stuff from America, but more than the switch stuff, we're taking Scandinavia, we're taking the line density and the tips for your migratory fish fishing. It's still taking a long time to come into the stillwater fraternity, although some people do use tips. But I think for migratory fish, the Scandi style of fishing, and fishing different river fishing applications for migratory fish, you need those lines, and there's only certain companies that are doing them properly. There's a lot of companies doing them, but there's only certain companies doing them properly.
It was interesting you mentioned that switch rod, actually, because getting a line to go with it was really difficult at the time, wasn't it? And I think I had a 10.5-foot 7-weight. And for me, a 10.5-foot rod's probably a true switch rod, whereas opposed to a short double-hander.
Yeah.
But it was trying to figure out, if I wanted to spay cast it, what I could use. And there wasn't really at the time much of a line that you could play with. And I think I had a 9-weight Snowbee on it, XS or something like that at the time. And then, of course, you got everything start to come out from there. But it was really interesting to see that and the development in that. That's been a rapid growth area, hasn't it? The fly lines for salmon fishing, steelheading, and the constant sort of development there, I guess.
I think the other thing as well is mentioned in the sink rates and the head lengths and the tapers that people are using is additional parts to their fly line. Is the river fishing side of things, more and more anglers are coming away from fly lines and they're looking at nylon tapers, or they're looking at straight through nylon. And you're seeing that, again, it's came from the continent. So to be effective in fishing a river, I'm coming off migratory fish here for a second, but for fishing for trout and grayling, we're seeing a real leaning towards skinnier, thinner rods, but at the same time, skinnier, thinner tippets. I know guys that are fishing 6-pound fluorocarbon straight through to an indicator and then 0.08 tippet. You can actually get this stuff from Chemco just now. It's called stretch tippet, and it comes in 0.20, I think, and 0.16 millimeter, and it'll stretch to double its length, so that you can fish ridiculously skinny tippet to spooky fish. And it's amazing. I think the whole thing with fishing is you shouldn't be able to catch everything. You know, there should always be that element of that's impossible. However, I think with lines for migratory fish, all the different tapers, all the different sink densities, all the different lengths, etc., and the nylon tippets that more and more competition anglers are using, you're now getting to the stage where fish are no longer impossible in certain situations. That kind of loses some of the magic for me. But at the same time, do you know what I mean? At the same time, we're developing, and that's the only way you can develop.
And I think that's an interesting one that you say there as well, because for me, I think the odds should be more in the favour of the fish, because we
Agreed.
don't want to catch everyone, do we?
Agreed.
And, we want to make sure some of them are left alone,
Yes.
and we can't, we can cover, like you say, and I'm being more river wrangler, that I can cover any section of a river effectively and efficiently and stand a chance of catching a fish. But
Yeah.
part of me thinks, do I actually want to do that
Yeah, I
as
know.
well as much? But yeah, interesting one. But you said you were out on the river with someone tomorrow, and you're guiding as well. Yeah, you're guiding Stillwater and rivers, or
A little bit of both, but it's more friends or people that I know that I'm taking out for a nice day. It's not like I've seen some of these guides in action. Gee whiz, these boys are shocking. I watch some of these guys and I wince. I mean, I've seen. I wouldn't mention any names, but I've seen a guy taking somebody out before, and he had this person casting on the grass for like 4 hours. And I was thinking, if I was casting the grass for 4 hours, I'd be going home. I don't want to cast on the grass. I want to catch a fish. So a guide, but I don't teach guide, if that makes sense. Technical guide. I would like people to catch fish, showing them things that they want to learn rather than casting, which I leave up to people like you that know what they're talking about. I've had enough time to teach my son how to cast. I wouldn't cast anybody, can't teach anybody else. But yeah, the technical side, I feel it's a real bonus to be able to say to somebody, do it this way and watch what happens. And it's amazing. It's their face is like, well, why did I not think of that? Because you've never done it before. People like myself and plenty of other people in the UK are doing this all the time. They've got it down to a T. And I think it's like you guys with your tips. For us river anglers, it's fly patterns. In the majority of river fishing situations, there's 3 or 4 dries that are going to work all the time. There's 2 or 3 nymphs that are going to work at the time. If that, 1 nymph. However, having it in different sizes with different weights can make such a big difference. I've got a fly that I fish in the river, and it's squirrel and black dubbin and a blackbead. That's it. But I've got that in size 20s up to a size 8 in different weights. And it's explaining to the people. I'll give you an example, Pete. Most people's idea in this country of French nymphing or nymphing is their flies bouncing along the bottom. Your fly shouldn't be bouncing along the bottom. A fish comes up in the water to take a nymph. The nymph should be above the bottom, mid-river at times. I tie a lot of my flies with brass beads to fish in the summer. A lot of guys are, what have you got brass beads for? I didn't want them on the bottom. I need the fish to come up for them. Yeah. There's tiny little bits. And these are things that I've learnt from other people. And I think it's good that I can pass these things from people that I've known onto others. This sharing of information.
Yeah. It was interesting. I was having exactly that conversation with my buddy yesterday and saying, look, they'll move and they may not be hard on the bottom the whole time. And with a grayling, how far that will move just to come and eat a bug. I've seen them many feet of water just come up and hit it. So yeah, it is interesting. That's where somebody who knows what they're talking about can add so much value and change a game quite dramatically from someone and get them to think in a wider perspective as well. But it's kind of interesting you say about the patterns, and we're trying to say the similar sort of thing here, that you don't need tons of stuff but have variety of sizes, and that's what you're thinking about, particularly with the dries. The first thing I think about is, do I need to down the size of it?
Yes. Yep.
Totally. It's there. But we were talking off mic as well about traveling fishing, and you've been to many, many places. Where's your favourite, your number one? Let's have a few of them. Where do you love to go and fish?
The best ever was Jardins de la Reina in Cuba. It was just a different world. I mean, just so many fish. And I managed to get a big permit, which is a bonus. But I think Iceland. I like Iceland. I like Norway. Northern Spain, I like. It's very similar to Scotland. But people think of Spain as sun and sand. That's it. That's what they think. They think of beaches. But northern Spain, the fishing's amazing. Slovenia. I recently came back from Tasmania. I was there back end of last year. I found that mesmerising. The fishing was just out of this world. But yeah, Ireland, Wales, Scotland. There's not that many great rivers in England, sadly now. Maybe down your way there is, but most syndicated and most has stocked fish. That's one of the reasons I'm in the Peacock. There is no stocking. So, yeah, I like the fact that I can go and catch wild fish. But Wales, the last couple of years, there's a few rivers. I wouldn't mention them on here, but the little urban industrial rivers, and the fish are just colossal. I mean, they're just ridiculous. Yeah. And people are pulling them out for fun. But it's getting to the stage now where these fish are becoming like carp. They're getting caught too often. And that kind of tarnishes that for me a little bit. Still like to catch one, mind.
Yeah, but no, I wouldn't. I've seen those pictures as well.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you mean. And it does, like you say, it's the excitement of not knowing what's on the end when you strike, or you see the rise, or if you're nymphing or whatever, and you strike and not knowing. And that's the thrill for me. I think the whole, and it doesn't matter. You know, we didn't touch in it. We'd been catching, like we said, some big fish early in the season, and it's not happening now. We had some yesterday, and they were handful, typical Devon size, and they're just as beautiful, and they're just as feisty, probably more so actually. Absolutely beautiful. But yeah, it is the thrill of it that I think I love, and not the unknown. But do you have somewhere you'd love to fish that you've never fished before?
Everybody will say it, buddy. My wife got offered a job in New Zealand before we had the kids. And it was a really good job, really big job, a huge relocation package. And I was like, take it. And she was like, I can't, because we wanted to have kids. And she didn't want to be away from her mum. So I would have to say New Zealand. I'd like to fish with Mike Kirkpatrick. I'd like to fish with Corey Scott. And I'd like to fish with Gary Little. Gary, who moved over there from Rugby, he used to fish Draycote quite a bit. And we had a day on Draycote 6 or 7 years ago. He came back over from Taupo, and he was just, the way he was describing it to me, every day he could catch lots of fish, lots of big fish, or lots of big fish. He says the place is incredible, absolutely incredible. And I think for that reason, it'd have to be New Zealand. Have to be.
Do you think Iceland's becoming the New Zealand, in the sense that we're seeing, you know, as friends of mine out, I'm seeing at the weekend who are out there at the moment, it looks as though they're having an amazing time. The
thing with Iceland is, I first went to Iceland, it would have been 2007, I think, 2007 or 2008. 2007, 2008, that sounds about right. Lake Thingvellir, nobody knew about it. I was fishing nymphs for char and trout in Lake Thingvellir in Thingvellir in the summer. But I fished a lake next to it called Storalone. Now, this thing must have been 700 or 800 acres. You could wade into the middle, and it was never above your waders, and you're fishing for trout averaging 2 to 3 pound. That to me was amazing. The thing with Iceland now is everybody's came focused on particularly Lake Thingvellir for these big trout. It's a tiny window. It's ridiculously expensive. And you're casting out and pulling lures the majority of the time. There is the odd occasion where you can catch them nymphing, but it's very mechanical fishing. Cast out, pull it back. You don't even need to move, Pete. Honestly, if you're in the right area, you don't even need to move. There's a couple of rivers. There's a few rivers that I fished. The river fishing is exceptional, but I would say completely different to anything that you could ever experience in here. I fished, there's one called the Mini Villiker, which is very famous, very hard to get onto. And I was lucky enough to catch 2 double figure fish for two rivers. On the Mini Villiker, there's people there from the start of the season till the end of the season, every single day. It gets a rest day when the chalet gets cleaned. So you're fishing for fish that are getting fished for all the time. So I was fishing like size 18 meat hook spiders. These hooks were proper spiders for these fish that were sipping midge. The sip midge, the majority of guys at Iceland that fish there are fishing things called silver ghosts or yellow ghosts, big lures. But the way to catch them was wet flies or nymphs. But what you would do is, it's so low and clear, you cannot get near the fish. So you imagine casting a fly line 40 feet with a tapered leader and 2 nymphs, and either roly-polying it back because the wind is so bad, you know, that's how you're fishing for them. but you're talking 3 or 4 fish a day.
Yeah.
People that didn't get me wrong. There is rivers when you go like the Big Laxa further up. There's a lot more. What's the word I'm looking for? Dry fly fishing. That's not the word I'm looking for. I kind of think the word the phrase that I'm trying to put across here, but it's more like it is here in the UK, whereas Middle Iceland is difficult fishing, and if you can't fish, you're not catching. Simple.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you've got a very, very experienced guide who's got a hook one and hand the rod to you, you're going to struggle.
And that's a bit of a downside if you paid several thousand quid for a few
It's a lot
days.
of money.
It's not doing it for you, isn't it?
I think the mini Villica's £300 a day. We had 3 days on it. But you have to take the chalet, etc. But yeah, it's very expensive. I mean, very expensive, especially when you think, and I feel these guys are ripping us off as well. If you go to the Ask, it's like 30 quid a day ticket. There, it's £300 a day. You can catch something as big in the Ask than you can over there,
Yeah, that's interesting. So is there the one place after New Zealand, saltwater, that you wanted to go to that you felt, wow, this could be the one?
Jarvis de Reina again. I've been with my family, I've been to Grand Cayman twice, and I know a guy out there. He works for Goldman Sachs Bank, based in Cayman, so he's originally from America. And the thing with Cayman is it gets a lot of fishing pressure because there's a lot of Americans there. So the bonefish get battered all the time. And I found that exhilarating because it was so hard to catch. Usually you rock up at a saltwater venue, you cast at a bonefish and it takes it.
Yeah.
Try doing that in Grand Cayman. It's
nice.
Like I was down onto 6 weights and £6 tippet with flies with no weight on at all and a couple of strands of bucktail, nothing else, just to keep it that high in the water because I was fishing so shallow. That was good. That was really good.
Yeah, that sounds right up my street, I have to say. Yeah, the more difficult, the more interesting it becomes. How does fishing feel to you right now? The state of fishing, fly fishing?
Just now, in a good place, but that's only because we've had this epidemic, this horrible, terrible thing that's happened to us. So what we've had a period of a lot of people sitting on, for want of a better phrase, sitting on their hands for such a long time. Now they're getting a chance to go out. So I see it at the reservoirs, I see it at the river, I see it at the course fishes that I take my little boy to. They're jam-packed. You'll know this yourself because you know people within the industry. The industry's having a boom just now. They've had such a bad time through February, April, May, and June. They're now starting to come out of it and they're making some money. And I think the thing with fishing, more so than any other sport, is if you give somebody a chance to try it and they catch a fish, they'll come back. You don't have that same thing with golf because you need to put loads and loads of time in it. However, if you catch a fish, somebody goes fishing and they catch a fish in a fly rod or a course rod, whatever it is, they'll want to go back and get that tug, that feeling again. Like I say to you right at the very start, catching a fish is like opening a Christmas present. You just don't know. You just don't know what it's going to be. And I think that's where we are just now. Prior to COVID, I thought we were in a downward spiral. We've lost media, we've lost brands, we've lost all sorts of things. And I think one of the worst things that's happening to fishing, for me personally, is a lot of fishing brands are jumping into bed with single big retailers. So you've lost the ability for the man in the street to check X, Y, and Z at his local tackle shop. We no longer have local tackle shops. Everybody's trying to buy online and sell to customers online. So you've lost that integration. You've lost that first base between your customer and the product. That's where I feel we are just now in fishing. I think the quicker suppliers, to be fair, I kind of see it happening, Pete. For me, the quicker suppliers can reach out to your layman rather than doing it through a retailer, the better. There's a few brands just now creating content straight to consumer, which is great. In the past, the supplier's been creating content for the retailer. I want to buy a fishing rod. I don't want a retailer to sell it to me. I want to be able to buy it on my off my own back, if that makes sense. I would rather a supplier communicate it to me rather than through a retailer. That's where I think we are in fishing. Another thing is, a lot of these big retailers, they want to make as much money as they can. Now, the problem with that is everybody's got to make money within the industry. Everybody has to make money. He makes a tenner, you make a tenner, they make a tenner. Everybody's made a tenner. Now it's getting to the stage where he makes £3, he makes £2.50, he's making a tenner. It's so unfair. Everybody should be making the same amount of money. That way, the end user, the consumer, gets a product at a reasonable price, not at a price that has to be bumped up a little bit so the retailer can make their margin or the supplier can make their margin. That's where I think it's unfair just now. It's unfair.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and having seen it from that side as well, it's interesting to get that view. It feels to me as though the growth may come with fishing also, that people being able to work from home now, we may see them start to move outwards, and as a result of that, may want to try more, let's call them country pursuits. And
Yes.
so it may be they pick up a fly rod for the first time to try it. That may be one of the reasons that we see that. I think the only very slight worry of that, and I saw it, and it always felt to me before that it happened, was that cycling took people from many other pastimes. So golf really suffered,
Yeah.
and with these things to cut obesity, to get exercise, to do weather, and I'm seeing it here when I drive down to the river. There's bikes everywhere, and that's great. It's wonderful to see, but it makes me wonder if people. And it seems as though fly rods are relatively cheap when you compare them to a bike. They seem extraordinarily expensive, but whether that may drag people away from a variety of other things as well. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
It's funny you should mention cycling. Having come from a massive company who did specialised in cycling, we've also got this massive boost from the government to promote cycling, promote well-being and promote health. You've also got the additional thing where now, as a cyclist, I can log my bike, a pedal machine, in my room onto my computer, and I can compete or I can do trails with other people. Do you know what I mean? So, yes, I think cycling, more so than anything else, is taking people away from other pursuits because it is so accessible. Cycling's never been so accessible. I get the fact that bikes are expensive. However, everybody seems to be doing it. Everybody, plus with this government scheme to get more people involved, bikes are going to become even more affordable. One of my wife's friends is the commercial director for Halfords, so I get to see it firsthand. Cycling is massive. It is only getting bigger. So yeah, there is a real worry there, Pete, that certain things, cycling being one of them, it's got the propensity to pull people away from fishing because it is one of these things where you can get outdoors and you can have fresh air and you can see a bit of the countryside. However, you can't catch a fish while you're doing it. That's what I would say.
No, I suppose the excuse is that you could cycle to the river and stuff like that. But yeah, I suppose it's one of those things that you can do with your family, isn't it? That you can all buy bikes and do that thing and everyone gets fit and gets exercise together. But, fishing on Dartmoor or a stream here or wherever you're fishing as well, you can do that as well, can't you? And you get a good workout in a different way. In my humble opinion, in a cooler way and a safer way, that's for sure as well. Seeing our little roads, so it'll be interesting to see how this develops, and I hope that this trend continues with the support of tackle companies.
Me too.
And continues through, and fingers crossed that does. But it's a fascinating conversation. I think we could carry on for quite some time. But let's talk about your having been involved with tackle, and have you got a Hall of Fame rod, for example, or a reel that's the one that's you're never going to get rid of?
I've got. It's funny because my first proper rod was built by Tony Vipond, who used to own Tweedside Tackle up in Kelso, and it was a Sage RPL Plus 2-piece that I had built for me for Loch Leven, and I sold it last year. It was one of these things. I always say to myself, I'm going to have that rod for the rest of my life. But then I sold it. I've got so many rods, Pete. It's just, you'll be the same. But two things for me. I've got a G Loomis GLX distance rod, which I use only for competitions, never use it for pleasure fishing, but I've yet to find anything like it. There is nothing like it. And my other thing would be a reel, and everybody will go on about these big name brands. I've had them all. But the one reel that stands out to me more than any other is the little German Vosslers. They're bomb-proof, the engineering's amazing, and they're quiet as a mouse. So that'd be my two bits, buddy. Those are the two that I must have.
Your RPL Plus, it wasn't a 9.5 foot 7 weight, was it?
Yep, 9.5 7 weight.
I've got one sitting in the cupboard here.
Yeah, brown.
I've got one, two-piece one. Yeah.
Cream sage tube.
Yep.
That was it.
Yep. I've got one sitting in the cupboard there. So, I know it well. And funnily enough, I bought it. There was a great tackle shop you may or may not know, Simpsons of Turnford.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Phil Barker, funnily enough, sent me an email this morning saying, I'm going down. Yeah. And it was, I reconnected with him because I used to go in there and he'd see me and start rubbing his hands. And that's where my addiction began in there. And I was talking to him this morning. So I think he's heading down to Devon at some stage. So I'm hoping to catch up with him. But yeah, the RPL Plus, the RPL I bought off him, I had a 9.5 foot 5 weight that I was fishing a small still water with an RPL, and I just loved it. I thought it was a fabulous rod. Yeah. They were all good. And the Vosslers, I remember when they came to the market, Nick and I went to FTEX and we met Ralph there. And I think they were just coming out. So that must have been 2004, would it have been 2005?
They've never changed. It's exactly the same machining now than it was back then. And it's the same, for what I can gather, it's the same machines that they use. Nothing's had to be replaced because they don't make that many of them. It's not like China. It's not like Korea. It's not millions and millions and millions, so we have to replace this part and that part. It's good, honest engineering.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm trying to think that GLX as well. Was that what you turned up to the AAP guy thing with?
Nah, I wouldn't have turned up with that. I never had that then. That would have been an Enigma EMG, because I love that as well. The original Airflow ones. Yeah. I can remember when they came out because they were like 350 quid. But I knew somebody that worked for Airflow, and I think I spent 250 on it. But yeah, I loved that. I've still got an Enigma in the shed. A 9 foot 6 weight Enigma that I use for streamer fishing.
Yeah, it's funny how some rods you just can't let go of, and those ones that you sit and think, man, I shouldn't have done. Yeah. Steve, this has been fantastic. I've really, really enjoyed talking to you. We covered so many interesting and varied topics as well, and it's been brilliant to catch up with you and talk to you about it, and being so open and honest as well, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast. I know listeners are going to enjoy this one. Thank you so much.
No, it's similar, Pete. It's been a real pleasure, buddy. I enjoyed the chat beforehand and I enjoyed the interview. Thanks ever so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Everyone, thank you for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. There'll be plenty more in the pipeline as well, so we're lining up lots more. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I look forward to putting out the next podcast very, very soon. Thanks for listening.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.